The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning when the fog hung so thick over the Yorkshire moors that Eleanor Whitmore could barely see her own hands pressed against the frost-covered window. She had been waiting for this moment for 3 years ever. Since her great-aunt Cordelia had passed away in that dreadful asylum, leaving behind nothing but whispered rumors and a crumbling estate that no one in the family dared to claim Eleanor's. Fingers trembled as she broke the wax seal bearing the Grayson family crest. A serpent coiled around a dying Rose. Miss Whitmore, the solicitor's careful handwriting began. You are hereby named sole inheritor of Ravenshollow Manor and all properties therein belonging to the Grayson lineage dating back to 1847. The year 1886 had brought nothing but sorrow to Eleanor's life. First, her beloved brother Thomas had died in that terrible accident at the textile mill, his body crushed beneath machinery that witnesses swore had moved on its own. Then her father succumbed to a wasting illness that made him speak in his final days of shadows that followed him and voices that called his name from empty rooms. Now at 23, Eleanor found herself alone in the world with nothing but a teaching position at the village school and the growing certainty that something dark ran in their bloodline. She had heard the stories whispered by the older women in town about the Graysons and their cursed legacy, how every generation lost their eldest child before they reached their 30th year. The women in the family were prone to madness and the men to violent deaths, how Ravenshollow Manor sat like a cancerous growth on the landscape, poisoning everything around it for miles. But Eleanor was desperate. The small inheritance her father left was nearly gone, and winter was coming with its promise of hunger and cold. Against every instinct screaming in her mind, she packed her few belongings into a worn leather satchel and took the morning coach toward the remote estate nestled deep in the Cumberland Mountains. The journey took 2 days through increasingly desolate countryside, where the trees grew twisted and black, and the few villages she passed seemed abandoned to all but the oldest residents, who watched her coach with hollow eyes on the second evening as darkness fell like a shroud. The coach driver refused to go any further. This is as close as I get to that place, miss, he said, his weathered face pale in the lamplight. You'll have to walk the last mile. Eleanor stepped down onto the muddy road, clutching her satchel and a single oil lamp. The driver handed down her trunk without meeting her eyes, then climbed back onto his seat. Whatever you do, miss, he called as he turned the horses around. Don't look in the mirrors. After midnight, before Eleanor could ask what he meant, the coach was rattling away into the darkness, leaving her alone on the narrow path that wound upward through a forest of dead oaks. The silence was absolute. Not even the sound of wind disturbed the air, and Eleanor realized with growing unease that she heard no night birds or insects or any of the small sounds that should fill a living forest. Her lamp cast a weak circle of yellow light that seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive darkness. With each step, the path grew narrower and more overgrown, as if nature itself was trying to reclaim it. After what felt like hours, Eleanor saw the first glimpse of Ravenshollow Manor through the skeletal branches. It rose against the star-filled sky like a monument to despair. 3 stories of blackened stone with tall, narrow windows that reflected her lamplight, like watching eyes, gargoyles perched on the corners of the roof, their faces worn smooth by decades of wind and rain, but still managing to leer down at her with expressions of malevolent hunger. Front door was massive oak bound with iron and carved with symbols that hurt Eleanor's eyes to look at. Directly strange twisting patterns that seemed to move in her peripheral vision. She found the key where the solicitor's letter said it would be hidden beneath the 3rd stone of the front steps. The metal was ice cold against her palm and felt heavier than it should. When she turned it in the lock, the sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Doors swung open on hinges that shrieked in protest, revealing a cavernous entrance hall. Eleanor stepped inside and immediately felt the temperature drop by at least 10 degrees. Her breath came out in visible puffs as she raised her lamp to illuminate the space. Walls were covered in portraits of stern-faced men and women, dressed in the fashion of decades past. All of them had the same pale skin and dark eyes. that seemed to follow her movement. At the center of the hall stood a grandfather clock that had stopped at exactly 11:59 dusk. Motes danced in her lamplight like tiny spirits, and everywhere she looked, she saw signs of abandonment furniture. Covered in white sheets that looked like shrouds, cobwebs hanging like funeral veils from the chandelier, and beneath it all a smell of decay and something else. Something sweet and cloying that reminded Eleanor of flowers left too long on a grave. She climbed the main staircase, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. The banister was carved with the same disturbing symbols as the front door, and felt somehow warm beneath her touch, as if something living pulsed within the wood. On the second floor, she found what must have been her great-aunt Cordelia's bedroom. The door stood slightly ajar, and when Eleanor pushed it open, she gasped. The room was exactly as it had been left 3 years ago, clothes still hanging in the wardrobe, books open on the nightstand, and on the vanity mirror, written in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "Seichi is coming, HOM." Flame flickered, and for a moment, she could have sworn she saw movement in the mirror's reflection, not her own face, but the pale features of a woman with hollow eyes and lips that moved as if speaking words Eleanor couldn't hear. The flame steadied, and the vision was gone, but Eleanor felt ice-cold fingers of dread wrap around her heart. She was not alone in this house. Something had been waiting for her arrival, something that knew she was the last of the Grayson bloodline. And as the grandfather clock somewhere below began to chime midnight, Eleanor realized with growing horror that her real inheritance was not this crumbling manor or the few pounds left in her great-aunt's account. It was whatever dark legacy had been passed down through generations of her cursed family, a legacy that was about to claim its newest victim. Eleanor barely slept that first night, despite her exhaustion. Every creak of the old manor's bones made her heart race, and twice she woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside her door. When she gathered courage to check, she found nothing but empty corridors stretching into darkness. Dawn brought little comfort. Gray light filtered through grimy windows, revealing the true decay of Raven's Hollow Manor wallpaper, peeled like diseased skin, and dark stains spread across the ceiling in patterns that resembled grasping hands. Eleanor made her way downstairs to search for the kitchen, hoping to find some remnant of food. The grandfather clock still showed 11:59, though she was certain she had heard it chime midnight. In the drawing room, she discovered something that made her blood turn to ice. A leather-bound journal lay open on the dusty writing desk, as if someone had been reading it moments before. The handwriting was her great-aunt Cordelia's, October 5th, 1883. The entry began, "The whispers grow stronger each night. They tell me things, Eleanor, terrible things about what happened to our family, about the price that was paid in 1847 when Ezekiel Grayson made his bargain. I see her in the mirrors now, the first Eleanor, my grandmother's sister who died so young. She warns me that the bloodline must be completed, that someone must take her place." Eleanor's hands shook as she read her great-great-aunt had shared her name, a coincidence that now felt like destiny. She flipped through more pages, finding increasingly frantic entries. November 3rd, 1883. Found the basement room today. One sealed behind the wine cellar. Oh God, what they did to her, what they let happen. The symbols carved into the walls, the chains still hanging from the ceiling, and in the center that horrible altar stained black with old blood. Eleanor slammed the journal shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. A basement room, and altar chains. What kind of family had she inherited? From somewhere deep in the house came the sound of a door slamming, then another, and another, as if someone was moving through the room searching. Eleanor grabbed an iron poker from the fireplace and crept toward the sound. The slamming stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The suffocating silence, she heard something else, a woman's voice singing softly a lullaby in a language that sounded like no earthly tongue. The melody was beautiful and terrible, making Eleanor's skin crawl. Even as tears sprang to her eyes, she followed the sound down a corridor lined with more portraits. These were older than the ones in the entrance hall, the faces more severe, the eyes more knowing. At the end of the hallway stood a door she hadn't noticed the night before. It was painted deep red like dried blood and bore no handle or keyhole, yet as Eleanor approached it swung open on silent hinges. Beyond lay a spiral staircase descending into absolute darkness. The singing was coming from below. Against every rational thought, Eleanor began to descend. The stone steps were worn smooth by countless feet and slick with moisture that didn't feel like water. The walls were covered in those same twisted symbols she had seen carved into the front door, but here they seemed to pulse with their own faint light. With each step, the temperature dropped until Eleanor's breath came out in thick clouds. The singing grew louder, more distinct, and she realized with horror that she recognized the voice. It was her own, but not as she sounded now, younger, more innocent. The voice of a child at the bottom of the stairs. Eleanor found herself in a circular chamber carved from living rock. Ancient symbols covered every surface, glowing with that sickly phosphorescent lighting. The center stood an altar made of black stone. Its surface was stained dark with substances Eleanor didn't want to identify. Iron chains hung from the ceiling above it, their links crusted with rust that might once have been blood. But it was what lay beside the altar that made Eleanor scream. A skeleton dressed in the rotted remains of a white nightgown, small delicate bones that belonged to a child. Around the skull's neck hung a locket. With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened it. Inside was a miniature portrait of a girl who looked exactly like Eleanor herself. Same dark hair, the same pale skin, the same large eyes, but there was something written on the back of the portrait in tiny script. Eleanor Grayson, born 1829, sacrificed 1847 letters, GE18, so that others might live. Eleanor backed away from the altar, her mind reeling. This child shared her name, her face, her bloodline. She had died here in this horrible place as part of some unthinkable ritual. The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, Eleanor heard footsteps on the stairs. Above, slow, measured steps coming down, but when she looked up, she saw nothing, only darkness that seemed to move and writhe with its own life. Eleanor, the voice, was soft as silk and cold as winter wind. You have come home at last, as I knew you would, as you were always meant to. Eleanor spun around, but the chamber was empty except for the altar and its grisly guardian. Who are you? She whispered. I am what you will become, what we all become in the end. The price of the Grayson legacy, the bargain made in blood and kept in bone. The phosphorescent symbols on the walls began to pulse faster, brighter, and Eleanor realized that the chamber was not empty after all. Shadows moved in the corner, shapes that might once have been human, all of them watching her with hollow eyes, all of them wearing her face. Choose, the voice whispered. Take your place willingly and end the curse, or run and watch it claim everyone you have ever loved, as it claimed your brother, as it claimed your father, as it will claim any who carry Grayson blood. Eleanor ran up the stairs, through the corridors, past the watching portraits, out into the gray morning light. But even as she gasped the cold air and felt the sun on her face, she knew it was too late. The curse had found her, and there was nowhere in the world she could run that it would not follow. Eleanor collapsed against an ancient oak tree at the edge of the manor grounds, her chest burning as she gasped for air. The morning sun felt weak and distant, as if something had drained the very warmth from the world behind her. Raven's Hollow manor loomed like a cancerous growth against the gray sky. Its windows seemed to watch her with malevolent intelligence. She had to get away, had to reach the village, find help, find answers. But as she turned to flee down the overgrown path, something made her stop. A sound like children laughing, faint and musical, coming from the direction of the village. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She knew that sound, had heard it echoing through her nightmares since childhood. The same laughter that had haunted her dreams the night before Thomas died, the night before her father fell ill. A warning she had been too young to understand. With growing dread, Eleanor realized the laughter was not coming from the village. It was coming from everywhere, from the trees, from the stones beneath her feet, from the very air around her. You cannot run from what lives in your blood, the voice whispered inside her mind. What has always been part of you. Eleanor pressed her hands to her ears, but the voice only grew louder. Do you think your brother's death was an accident? Do You think your father's illness was natural. They tried to break the chain. Eleanor tried to end what began in 1847. But the debt must be paid. The bargain must be kept. Eleanor stumbled back toward the manor, knowing with sick certainty that she had no choice. The answers lay within those cursed walls, in her great-aunt's journal in the basement chamber, in whatever unholy history the Grayson family had tried so desperately to bury. She found Cordelia's journal where she had left it. Leather binding felt warm beneath her fingers, as if it contained some terrible life of its own. With shaking hands she turned to earlier entries. September 12, 1883. Found grandfather's papers in the attic to daybills of sale correspondence with men whose names I dare not write, and a contract signed in blood. Ezekiel Grayson's contract. My God, would he agreed to what he sold to save his dying crops, his sick livestock, his starving family. Eleanor's vision blurred as she read her great-grandfather. Ezekiel had made some kind of deal in 1847. The same year the first Eleanor had died. September 20th, 1883. The truth is worse than I imagined. It was not just prosperity. Ezekiel sought it was immortality, life eternal for the Grayson bloodline, but the price. Oh, sweet Jesus, the price one innocent from each generation sacrificed on the altar of his greed, their life. Force-feeding the thing he summoned, the thing that still lives beneath this house. Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned the page. September 30th, 1883. I understand now why the women in our family go mad, why the men die violent deaths. We are not victims of coincidence. We are cattle, bred and culled according to the terms of Ezekiel's bargain. Entity chooses who lives and who dies, who bears children and who remains barren always, ensuring that the bloodline continues always, ensuring that there will be another innocent to harvest. The journal fell from Eleanor's nerveless fingers. She was not an inheritor. She was livestock bred for slaughter, like the child whose bones lay on that altar. Everything in her life had been orchestrated. Her brother's death to drive her to desperation, her father's illness to leave her alone, the inheritance that brought her here, all of it designed to deliver her willingly into the monster's hands. From somewhere in the house came the sound of heavy footsteps, deliberate, measured, coming closer. Eleanor grabbed the journal and ran toward the kitchen, but the footsteps followed always just behind her, never quite catching Upus if whatever pursued her was playing some cruel game. In the kitchen she found a door she hadn't noticed before, heavy oak reinforced with iron bands. It stood slightly ajar, revealing stone steps leading down into darkness. Not the same stairs she had found before. These were older, more worn, and from the depths below came a sound that made her soul recoil, breathing deep and rhythmic, like something vast and ancient dreaming in the dark against every instinct, screaming at her to flee. Eleanor descended. The walls here were not carved stone but living rock, slick with moisture that glowed with that same sickly phosphorescence. Strange roots pushed through cracks in the stone, thick as a man's arm and pulsing with their own heartbeat. The breathing grew louder, more distinct, and with it came whispers in a dozen different voices, all of them pleading, all of them afraid. Help us, free us, end this. At the bottom of the stairs, Eleanor found herself in a vast cavern. Ceiling disappeared into blackness above, and in the center, coiled around a pillar of black stone, was something that had never been human. It was massive, serpentine at scales, shifting between colors that had no names. Where its head should have been was a writhing mass of tentacles, each one ending in an eye that burned with ancient malevolence, and wrapped around its body like jewelry were chains, hundreds of them, each one ending in the ghostly outline of a human figure, the souls of the sacrificed, bound to feed the thing that Ezekiel Grayson had summoned, bound to keep it strong, bound to ensure it could fulfill its end of the bargain. The creature's many eyes fixed on Eleanor, and when it spoke, its voice was the sound of worlds dying. Welcome home, little lamb, you are just in time. Ritual moon rises tonight, and you, sweet Eleanor, will complete the cycle, will join your ancestors in eternal servitude, will feed my hunger. For another generation. Eleanor looked at the ghostly figures chained to the monster's body and saw her own face repeated again and again, different ages, different eras, but always the same. Girl always Eleanor, always chosen, always sacrificed, you see now. The creature whispered, you understand, you are not the first Eleanor. Grayson, you are simply the latest, the newest link in a chain forged in blood and desperation. Your death will ensure that the family line continues, that prosperity flows to your distant cousins, that the bargain remains unbroken. Eleanor stared at the horror before Herat, the souls of her ancestors writhing in eternal torment at the future that awaited her, and for the first time since arriving at Raven's Hollow Manor, she smiled, because buried in Cordelia's journal, hidden in the ravings of a madwoman, she had found something the creature did not expect: a way to break the chain, a way to turn Ezekiel's bargain against itself. But she would have to survive until midnight, and she would need help from the very souls the monster held captive, the ghosts of every Eleanor who had come before Eleanor. Backed away from the monstrous entity, her mind racing through the fragments she had read in Cordelia's journal, hidden among the ravings about voices and shadows, had been something else, a single line that had seemed meaningless until now. The contract bears no signature save blood, and the willing consent must be freely given. Willing consent, that was the key. Every Eleanor before her had come to the altar in terror, in desperation, but never in true willingness, never understanding the full scope of what they faced. The creature's many eyes followed her retreat. You cannot escape what you were born to fulfill. Your blood calls to me. Your death feeds me. It has fed me for 4 generations. Eleanor reached the stairs and climbed quickly behind her. The breathing grew agitated, angry. The whispers of the chained souls became screams, but she had seen something in their ghostly faces, a flicker of hope when she smiled, a recognition that perhaps this time would be different. In the kitchen, Eleanor spread Cordelia's journal open on the wooden table. Her fingers traced the cramped handwriting, searching for the passages that had caught her attention. October 28, 1883, discovered the original contract today, hidden in a lead box beneath the foundation stones, written in Latin and something older, something that predates human language, but the binding clause is clear. The offering must come willingly, must understand the full consequence, must choose death over life with full knowledge. No Eleanor has ever truly chosen. We have only ever been driven. Eleanor's heart hammered as she read on November 1st, 1883, All Saints Day, the thin time between worlds. I think I understand now. The contract can be broken, but not by refusing the sacrifice, by changing its terms, by offering something the entity values more than a single life, the willing surrender of the entire bloodline, the conscious choice to end what Ezekiel began. But it must be done by one who truly understands, who chooses not from fear, but from love. Eleanor slammed the journal shut. Cordelia had found the answer, had discovered that the contract could be terminated, but she had died in the asylum before she could act, leaving only scattered clues for Eleanor to piece together. From upstairs came the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the rooms above. Eleanor grabbed a candle and climbed the main staircase. The portraits lining the walls seemed more animated than before, their eyes tracking her movement, their lips moving in silent conversation. On the second floor, she found all the bedroom doors standing open, revealing rooms that had been empty the night before, but were now occupied. In each doorway stood a figure in white, young women with Eleanor's face, her dark hair, her pale skin, but their eyes held depths of sorrow that spoke of lifetimes of captivity. Sister, the nearest one whispered, you have come at last. We have been waiting, hoping, praying that one of us would find the strength. Eleanor stepped closer. The ghost was translucent, but solid enough to cast shadows in the candlelight. You are the first Eleanor, she said, the one who died in 1847. I am, the spirit replied, 18 years old and dead for nearly 40, chained to that thing below, forced to watch as it claims my sisters. One by one, generation, more figures appeared in the other doorways. Eleanor from 1865, Eleanor from 1829, Eleanor from 1873, all of them bearing the same face, The same tragic destiny we felt you coming the first, Eleanor continued. Felt the pull of blood calling the blood. But this time is different. You carry something we never had. What is that? Eleanor asked knowledge. Another voice replied this. Eleanor appeared older, sadder. I am Eleanor from 1901. The last to be taken before you. I learned the truth too late. Discovered Cordelia's research only after my death. But you have time, hours before the ritual moon reaches its peak, hours to gather what is needed. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the supernatural cold permeating the house. What is needed? The contract itself, the first, Eleanor said, hidden in the foundation, and something more, the original altar stone, the one Ezekiel used to seal his bargain. It lies in the basement chamber, beneath what you saw carved with his blood oath. If you can bring them together, if you can speak the words of release, you can free us all. But the cost? Eleanor's throat tightened. What cost? The ghosts exchanged glances, sorrow rippling through their translucent forms. To break a blood contract, you must pay in blood. The oldest, Eleanor whispered, not just your death, but the willing sacrifice of your entire family line. Conscious choice to end the Grayson bloodline forever. No children, no descendants, no future generations to carry the curse. Only death and silence. Eleanor closed her eyes. She thought of her brother Thomas, of her father, of all the innocents who had died to feed this monster's hunger, of all the children who would die if she failed. Where's the contract? She asked. In the cellar. The first, Eleanor replied, behind the wine racks. Look for the stone marked with Ezekiel's seal and the altar stone beneath the chamber where you found my bones. There's another level deeper, older, where Ezekiel first summoned the entity, where the original binding was forged. Eleanor nodded. The plan was forming in her mind. Dangerous, probably impossible, but it was the only chance she had. The only chance any of them had. Will you help me? She asked. Ghosts smiled for the first time since their deaths. They smiled. We have waited 40 years for someone to ask. The first, Eleanor said, we will help, but remember, the entity grows stronger as midnight approaches, and it will not give up its hold on us easily. It will try to break your will, to make you doubt, to make you choose the easy death over the hard sacrifice. Eleanor looked around at the magla faces of her ancestors, her sisters in suffering, her partners in this final desperate gambit. Then we had better hurry, she said. We have a monster to kill and a curse to break before the moon reaches its peak. Thunder rolled across the moors, and in the distance lightning split the sky. The ritual night had begun. Eleanor descended into the wine cellar, with the ghosts of her ancestors floating beside her like pale flames. First, Eleanor led the way, her translucent form casting no shadow, but somehow illuminating the path ahead. Here, she whispered, pointing to a section of wall where the stones bore faint scratches. Ezekiel's seal, carved the night he made his bargain. Eleanor ran her fingers over the marks. They felt warm despite the cellar's chill, and as she traced the pattern, something shifted in the wall. A grinding sound of stone against stone. One of the foundation blocks slid inward, revealing a hollow space. Inside lay a lead box green with age. Eleanor lifted it with trembling hands. The metal burned her skin like ice. Inside the box, wrapped in oiled leather, was a document covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The original contract, written in Latin and something far older, something that predated human civilization. At the bottom, in faded brown stains, were two signatures, one in Ezekiel Grayson's careful script, the other in a language of claws and tentacles. Now, the altar stone, the ghost of Eleanor from 1865 said, but be warned, deeper chamber is where the entity's power is strongest, where its true form waits. What you saw above was merely a projection, a shadow of what lies beneath. They descended through hidden passages carved from living rock. Walls pulsed with that sickly phosphorescence, and with each step the temperature dropped, until Eleanor's breath came out in thick clouds. The whispers of trapped souls grew louder, more urgent, as if they sensed that freedom might finally be at hand. The passage opened into a cavern that defied comprehension. It stretched away into darkness. On all sides, the ceiling lost in shadows above, and at its center, on a raised platform of black stone, stood An altar older than civilization carved, with symbols that seemed to move and writhe in the flickering light, but it was what surrounded the altar that made Eleanor's courage falter. Thousands of chains each, one ending in the ghostly outline of a human figure, not just the Eleanor's but every life the entity had claimed over the centuries, every soul it had devoured to maintain its power. Children, adults, entire families, all of them trapped, all of them suffering, all of them looking to Eleanor with desperate hope. "My God," Eleanor whispered. "How many?" "The entity is ancient," the first Eleanor replied. "Older than human memory." Ezekiel was not its first contractor merely. The most recent, it has fed on human suffering for millennia, but the Grayson bargain was different, more binding, more complete. Your ancestor didn't just trade for prosperity, he gave the entity something it had never possessed before: a guaranteed source of power, a renewable harvest. A family cursed, defeated forever. Eleanor approached the altar. Stone was carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as she watched. At its center was a depression stained dark with the blood of centuries, and there, etched in the stone itself, were the terms of Ezekiel's bargain, written his own hand. Ezekiel Grayson, do willingly bind my bloodline to the Ancient One in exchange for prosperity and long life. I offer one innocent from each generation to be taken on the night of the ritual moon, their life forced to feed the eternal hunger. This bargain to continue until the bloodline ends, or until one comes who offers greater sacrifice, signed in blood and sealed in stone. Let none break what I have made. Eleanor read the words with growing understanding and growing horror. Greater sacrifice, she said. What could be greater than an innocent life? Willing destruction of everything. Ezekiel sought to preserve the ghost of Eleanor from 1901 replied. He wanted his bloodline to prosper, to continue to grow strong. But if one of his descendants chooses to end that bloodline, sacrifice not just their own life, but the future of their entire family, then the contract becomes void, because the very thing it was meant to protect would cease to exist. Thunder crashed overhead. The ritual moon was rising. Eleanor could feel its pull in her blood, could feel the entity stirring in the depths below. How do I do it? She asked. Place the contract on the altar. The first Eleanor said, speak the words of release, but be warned. The moment you begin, the entity will fight you. It will show you visions. Promise you anything. Try to break your will. You must hold fast, must complete the ritual, or we will all be lost. Eleanor placed the ancient document on the blood-stained stone. The symbols began to glow, first faintly, then brighter, until the entire cavern was bathed in that sickly light. From the depths below came a sound like worlds screaming. The entity was rising, its true form, not the serpentine projection she had seen before, but something vast and terrible, something that existed partly in this reality and partly in spaces between dimensions. Fooliest child, its voice boomed through the cavern. You think to defy what has stood for generations. He have claimed hundreds of your kindi, will claim you as W. Thing erupted from the darkness. It was impossible to describe. A writhing mass of shadow and teeth and eyes, tentacles thick as tree trunks, each one ending in a mouth full of razor fangs, and at its center, an intelligence so alien, so malevolent that looking directly at it threatened to shatter Eleanor's sanity. Okay, what I offer you, the entity roared. The air shimmered, and Eleanor saw visions. Her brother Thomas alive and whole, her father restored to health, a life of comfort and prosperity, children and grandchildren, a future bright with promise. All of this can be yours. So you must do is step away from the altar, accept your reality as your ancestors did, and your family will know generations of HPPNs. As Eleanor wavered, the visions were so real, so tempting, but then she looked at the thousands of chained souls, at the faces of her ancestors, at the endless suffering the entity had caused. No, she said, her voice small but steady, no more. She placed her hands on the contract and began to speak the words of release. I, Eleanor Grayson, do willingly break the bondi. Offer not one life but all lives. I choose to end what Ezekiel began to sacrifice the future for the freedom of the past. Let the Grayson name die with me. Let our bloodline end in silence. Let the contract be void, and let these souls go free, the entities. Screams shook the foundations of the manor above them. Stone cracked and mortar fell like rain, but Eleanor continued. By blood, it was sealed. By blood, it is broken. She drew the knife she had taken from the kitchen, pressed its edge to her palm, let her blood drip onto the ancient parchment. The contract burst into flames, but not ordinary fire. Cold flames that burned silver and blue, and as it burned, the chains began to break one by one, the trapped souls rising like birds released from cages, their faces transformed. From suffering to joy to peace, to gratitude beyond words, the entity writhed and screamed as its power sources were severed, its form beginning to collapse, to fold in on itself. It is not over, it howled. I will find another way, another family, another bloodline. To Coraru P. This, I promise you, Eleanor said, as she felt her life ebbing away. As long as there are those who remember, who know the truth, who stand against the darkness, your kind will never again find purchase in this world. The burning contract crumbled to ash, the entity's scream faded to silence, and Eleanor collapsed beside the altar, her task complete, her sacrifice accepted. But as darkness closed around her vision, she saw something that filled her heart with unexpected joy, the ghost of her brother Thomas standing beside the altar with her father, both of them smiling, both of them free. Eleanor's vision blurred as her lifeblood pooled on the ancient altar stone, but she was not afraid. Around her the cavern filled with light as hundreds of freed souls rose toward whatever peace awaited them beyond this world. Her ancestors, her family, strangers who had suffered for centuries, all of them ascending like stars, returning to heaven. Thank you, sister, the first Eleanor whispered as her ghostly form began to fade. Thank you for what we could never do, for choosing love over fear, sacrifice over survival. One by one, the spirits departed, their chains dissolved, their torment ended until only Eleanor remained in the vast chamber alone with her fading breath. And the silence of victory above her Raven's Hollow manor began to collapse, the entity's destruction severing whatever dark power had held the cursed structure together. Stone crashed down, timber splintered, and the house that had stood as a monument to Ezekiel's greed crumbled into ruin. Eleanor closed her eyes and waited for the end, but death did not come as she expected. Instead, she felt warmth, gentle hands lifting her, and when she opened her eyes, she saw Thomas not as a ghost, but solid, real, his face filled with the love she remembered from childhood. It's time to go, sister, he said softly. Father is waiting. Eleanor looked around. The cavern was gone. Altar, the chains, the horrible symbols carved in stone, all of it had vanished. In its place was a meadow filled with wildflowers, the same meadow where she and Thomas had played as children, where their father had taught them to catch fireflies on summer evenings. Am I dead? She asked. Thomas smiled. Does it matter? You did what needed to be done. You broke a curse that had claimed dozens of lives. You freed souls that had been trapped for centuries. You chose the hard path, the right path. And now you can rest. Eleanor let him help her to her feet. The pain was gone, the cold, the terrible weight of destiny that had pressed down on her since childhood. For the first time in her life, she felt truly free. What happens now? She asked. Now, said a familiar voice. Eleanor turned to see her father approaching through the tall grass. He looked younger than she remembered, the lines of worry and illness erased from his face. Now we go home, he said. The real home that exists beyond curses and contracts, beyond the reach of things that feed on human suffering. Eleanor looked back once toward where the manor had stood. In the distance she could see smoke rising from the ruins, and something else, a figure walking away from the destruction, a young woman with dark hair. This woman was not Eleanor, not another victim of the Grayson Curse. This was someone else, someone who had witnessed the manor's collapse, who would carry the story forward, who would ensure that the truth was not buried again. Who is she? Eleanor asked a historian. Thomas replied. Sarah Mitchell. She came to research the Grayson family legends. Arrived just as the curse was breaking. She will write the story, make sure people remember, make sure nothing like this happens again. Eleanor watched the distant figure grow smaller. She felt no envy, no regret, that she would not live to see the world beyond this nightmare. Her sacrifice had meaning. Her choice had consequences that would ripple forward through time. Will she be safe? Eleanor asked the entity. It threatened to find another family, another bloodline to corrupt her father, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Entity is gone, he said, truly gone. When you broke the contract, you didn't just free the souls it held you, severed its connection to this reality, cast it back into the void between worlds. It will not return, cannot return. Your sacrifice was complete, final, and effective. Eleanor felt the last of her earthly burdens lift away. The guilt over Thomas's death, the shame over her father's illness, the terror that had haunted her dreams, all of it dissolved like morning mist. Ready, she said. Together the three of them walked deeper into the meadow toward a light that grew brighter with each step, a light that promised rest, peace, and the end of all suffering. Behind them the wind scattered the ashes of Raven's Hollow Manor across the moors. By morning there would be nothing left but a foundation of blackened stones, and even those would crumble in time, reclaimed by the earth, forgotten by history, except for the story Sarah Mitchell would tell, the account she would publish in the Journal of Folklore and Antiquities, warning she would pass down to future generations. The Grayson Curse, a documented case of hereditary supernatural affliction by Sarah Mitchell, 1887. This researcher can attest that certain bloodlines may carry within them the seeds of their own destruction, that desperate ancestors may make bargains whose consequences echo through generations, but also that even the darkest curse can be broken by one who chooses love over fear, sacrifice over self-preservation, the willing extinction of evil over its perpetuation. Eleanor Whitmore, whose true name was Eleanor Grayson, died on the night of October 31st, 1886. Her body was never found, but this writer believes she did not die in vain, that her sacrifice freed not only her own family, but countless others who might have fallen prey to similar supernatural predators. Let her story serve as both warning and inspiration that no curse is too strong, no evil too ancient, be overcome by the human capacity for selfless love. May she rest in eternal peace, and may her courage light the way for others who face darkness. Sarah closed her journal and looked out across the ruins one final time. Wind carried no whispers, now no voices calling from beyond the grave, only silence and the promise that Eleanor Grayson's sacrifice would not be forgotten, that the truth would survive even when the stones crumbled to dust and the moors reclaimed what remained of Raven's Hollow Manor. Some stories are too important to die, some truths too vital to bury, some sacrifices too noble to forget. Eleanor's story would endure, a testament to the power of love over evil, of courage over fear, of one young woman's choice to end a cycle of suffering, no matter the cost to herself. In the meadow beyond the world, Eleanor walked hand in hand with her family, free at last, forever at peace. The curse broken, the bloodline ended, darkness defeated, and love triumphant in the end.